Thiago Oliveira. Welcome to Lucid Commons.
Thanks for having me, Tatiana.
I'm so excited to have you here. Did I completely butcher the last name?
It's all good. Don't worry about it.
Okay, I appreciate it. All right, Thiago, let's start with who is Thiago?
Ooh, Thiago, many things in the same person. But for the sake of this exercise, at this moment, I'm a Brazilian, Portuguese family. I have lived 1/3 of my life in Latin America proudly, 1/3 of my life in Europe proudly, 1/3 of my life in the US. And I consider myself a citizen of all of these places and cultures. And what got me here is fundamentally my curiosity. Like, I'm a curious person. I love to try new things. I love to learn new languages, new foods, get to know new people, be of service, help others, and just try new things. That's always been the common theme throughout my life. I'm a husband. I'm a dad, a proud dad of 2 amazing boys. I'm a good friend. And I could keep going on and on and on all of the roles I play. And recently, I'm an entrepreneur. After a 25-year executive career, I chose to prioritize my agency, my curiosity, my innovation, and really drive some cool stuff that I think the world needs. We can talk about that. And also, I have become an artisanal gelato maker. That's my newest. We can talk all day long about gelato flavors and making gelatos and all of that good stuff. And I think it kind of represents who I am, Tatiana, because gelato has a science piece. So there's the nerd side of Thiago, and there's the art piece. The flavors, the mixing, and the texture, and how to really innovate and try new things. And I think it's a perfect combination of 2 aspects of who I am that I value deeply. Yeah, that's me. So in a nutshell, that's all of me.
I want to hear more about this scientist Thiago and creative artist Thiago. Were you ever in a place where you felt like you could only be one, or like those two things were mutually exclusive? How did you come to understand that you were curious and you needed things that could let you access both pieces of yourself?
Look, I don't think I ever had any constraint on that. But I also think that these 2 parts of me, although they feel separate, I don't think they are. They're all combined. And they showed up in more intensity depending on where I am, what I am doing, who I am with, and the context. So I don't see them as separate. I see them as part of the same being, just the manifestation showing up differently, but they feed the soul differently, right? So I'm a nerd that I love to get into a database of numbers and crunch numbers and all of the analytics and mathematics. I love that. And I also love, arts and I love science. And I enjoy getting a scientific research paper and just sipping coffee and reading through it and trying to make sense. So, and I also love a novel, getting a nice novel and just reading through it. So I think it just complements each other.
Yeah, I appreciate that perspective because I think in modern society, we might colloquially understand as art and science as being 2 separate things, right? We have the artsy fartsy people and the creatives, and then we have STEM, the hard scientists. So it's really cool to think about them as complementing each other, and you can be both. I'd like to hear more about this leap that you took from corporate America into being an entrepreneur and founding Unmaze.
Look, I feel extremely proud, privileged, and grateful for all what life has given me, Tatiana. Like, no complaints and no regrets. When I think about where I was, starting university, let's say, to where I am, not in my wildest dreams, I would have thought of next 25, 30 years, what could have happened. And it did, and I'm really proud. I had a 25 almost years of career experience running country roles, regional roles, global roles of increased complexity in super advanced, edgy, innovative places like Johnson & Johnson. That's a company that I love so much. I was there 17 years. And, life has given me a lot of cool experiences. I met amazing people, done really cool worked with awesome leaders, like super cool leaders. So I don't regret. Then I moved into, early stage ventures. IPO'd one company as chief people officer, also a completely different experience. And the entrepreneur aspect really resonates with me. Like, I just love the messiness. I just love the build up phase. So all of those things really excite me. And then, like, what happened was what I had realized, I remember perfectly, it was 2 summers ago. Me and my wife, we dropped the boys at my mother's, southern Portugal, where she lives. We took a plane to Cape Verde, and we were there for a week. And we did a lot of hiking. Now Cape Verde kind of became famous because of the World Cup. Now everyone knows where it is, mostly on the map, but it's a really cool place to go. And I remember we were going to a hike. We went to the top of a volcano, an extinct volcano, of course. I don't want any lava near me. And it was a 6 hours hike down on these little mule tracks, like from 200 years ago, like super cool place to go. And I remember the guide was in the front, my wife was behind him, and I was the last. And it was all just focusing so you don't fall or anything like that. And in those 6 hours, while I was just doing that, I felt it was the first moment in years I actually had this space, this container for me to, like, introspect, go deep, go inside and organize my thoughts, my feelings. And not making the long story short, what I realized was through the hike was that, yes, I felt super proud of all the work that I've done, all the impact, all the amazing experiences. But I realized that at least in the last decade or the last 15 years or so of my journey, I was mostly, not all the time, mostly involved on trying to solve big problems and looking at systems and looking at teams and looking at leaders through the lens of deficit. What is wrong? What needs to be fixed? And yes, we fixed it. And the moment you fix something, other 3 things get broken or 3 new problems arise. And it's a continuous effort. And I was like, is there a different way to do this? Like, can we be more generative? Can we find a different way? And this is what led me to go back to study after 20 years of my master, of my graduate program. And the road led me to Case Western University, where we met, and to the field of positive organizational psychology. And yes, I found the answer. There is a different way of doing this, of building sustainable, positive change whether at the system level, the team level, the leader level, in a very different way. And then I went there to equip myself, and it changed me, rewired my DNA as a person, even inside my house, in my relationships, my personal relationships, but also my craft, my business, my work. And this is where I found Unmaze, with the belief, with the thesis that there is a different way we can help others transform. So that is my story. Like, I feel very grateful for that hike and having that container, and really like, wow, like I wish people could have had, including myself, more time to reflect. And that's one of the biggest challenges of modern society, the polarity or the tension between introspection and action. Like, how much are we truly investing time to reflect in our own experiences, what's important for us, how aligned we are with our values, and all of that. And I'm very thankful. And that was a moment of transition. That was a watershed moment, I call, for me.
That's beautiful. I mean, that's really exactly why this podcast was started. I had a similar, I call it a lucid moment or a moment of clarity back in December. And it was in this space, this container, I had made time. Now, your hike was 6 hours. My moment was 60 minutes. I went to a sound therapy, a sound bath class. If you've ever gone, how beautiful. Isn't that such a transformative experience? I mean, I was like vibrating. It was so cool. But I had one of these moments where whoosh, just everything rushes to the surface, and you have time, finally, time and space to just think, right? To just pause long enough to hear yourself think. And the clarity that I gained from that, just from one moment of stillness, from 60 minutes, I had realized I hadn't sat still probably for most of my 20s, right? And I think you're right. I think that is part of some of the problems that we have in modern society is we are all so busy. Go, go, go. We're on this hamster wheel, right? We're on autopilot, just trying to get through this day, put one foot in front of the other, but we rarely create the time and space for ourselves to just pause and reflect. And I'm with you. I want more of those moments for everybody. I want that 6-hour hike for people. I want that 60 minutes of a sound therapy class for people. I would love to hear more about what did that actually feel like to have this shift and to gain a different perspective? Because when you see something in a new way, it shifts something inside of you, right? You are transformed as a person. You are seeing the world through a different lens, right? You said through a more generative lens. So what did that look like for you? Thiago before that moment and Thiago after that moment.
Look, I think there are two parts, like the feeling part. It's really scary. It's uncomfortable because you challenge the world you know, and the world you feel comfortable in, that you know how to navigate. So I think that that's the first feeling. And you need to embrace it. You need to embrace this unknown, this scary feeling, and say, okay, so what does that mean? What is emerging here? There's something emerging that I couldn't actually put a name to it, that I couldn't really, that I could touch it in a way. So I think that that's first. Second, I feel, to your question, I feel that also it's exciting. Like, you get excited, you say, what does that mean? And that forces you more introspection. And that forces you to actually, at least me, for me, I build on my relationships. So, like, I did go to several people that I trust, that I value their opinions, that we disagree on stuff, and I started to share what was brewing inside me and trying to make sense. And a lot of people along the way helped me a lot. Like, I can name them here. A lot of people helped me to gain that clarity. And because at first it's kind of a little diffused. So that is what happened. And then what I realized was that I needed to unmaze myself. So that goes the metaphor, and then throughout that experience, I realized that, and I remembered an old Greek myth I had heard about it years and years back of Daedalus. And that moment, I was like, wow, I am Daedalus. Everyone is Daedalus. And Daedalus, back in the ancient Greek times, he was a marvelous, ingenious person. All the types of problems in the world, the kings would ask him to go there and fix, and he would create new solutions, new stuff. And he was very famous, very edgy, and one day he gets a call. He gets, I don't know,
A
how they
pigeon?
would, a pigeon, yeah, maybe a pigeon. But the king of Crete asked him because he had an unsolvable problem. And the problem was his wife had given birth to a half man, half bull, the Minotaur, and he couldn't kill the Minotaur because it was his wife's, it was, but he was killing left and right all people in the island, and he couldn't kill, but he did not know what to do. So Daedalus goes there and envisions the labyrinth, builds the labyrinth, locks the Minotaur in, and everyone is happy. The king is happy. When he goes to cash out the money and say goodbye, I solved your problem, I'm going to go to the next thing, the king says, oh, guess what? I like it so much. Your skills are so valuable. You're my slave from now on. You are imprisoned here. And he got prison, and he couldn't live by sea. It's an island. The king has all the boats around it. He couldn't live by land. So he looks up and he sees the birds. He starts collecting the feathers. He glues them with the beewax, prototypes, wings. So he and his son that was with him, they fly away for his freedom. Anyway, that's the story. And I saw myself on that story. My own success had become my own prison, my own labyrinth. And I was walking around the walls without a real path or exit. And the only way out is to gain perspective.
The only way out is up and out, huh? To gain that perspective and to have a bird's eye view. Interesting. Okay, I love this metaphor. I want to hear more about what it was like to do the work to unmaze yourself before you founded Unmaze and started unmazing workplaces and work environments.
Yeah. Look, I'm very thankful for the relations around me, the nurturing, the support. I've done a lot of Enneagram work. I've done a lot of conversations about it, about myself. And what I realized was that I felt like a Russian doll in a way, that something was growing and I was feeling stuck. I needed a new shell. And I wanted to do something different, and that is basically it. I was like, I want to do something different. And what do I love to do? I love to do three things. I love to innovate. I love to create. I love to solve problems. I love to be of service. And now the value of freedom, the value of intellectual curiosity, it matters more than financial gains, or stability, which I've always, valued a lot. And that's it. And like you just step into it, embrace it, and see what happens. So that's a little bit on how I unmaze myself, how Unmaze came to life, and the type of work that I am leading, that I'm doing. And it's not a work for me; it's kind of a mission. Like I want us, Daedalus, to raise ourselves, to see the complexity, and to acknowledge that what brought us success can also be our own imprisonments, prisons of our own making, and we gotta find a way out.
Can you say more about that, about achieving great success in your personal life and your career, and how that can trap you in a cage and how that can become a prison at some point. And how do you really realize that it's a prison, right? You know, almost like the fish swimming in water. How do you realize you're in water?
Yeah, that's a great question, Tatiana. Look, I think it depends on the type of life you want to have, and there's there's a lot of people that are just fine with their life. That's great. Like, that's honorable, and that's the perfect life. So, like, if nothing is eating inside you or brewing inside you, that's fine. Keep doing what you're doing and enjoy life, and that's the whole point of how you fill up the 80, 90, 100 years that you're giving, if lucky. How you fulfill that. But there are many people that we all have this brewing thing that you feel here in the belly. It's like uncomfortable, like you were describing me, like, how you came to where you are right now. And the only way out is to pay attention. You got to pay attention. You got to be present. You got to reflect. You got to try. And you have to use your relationships around you in support of what is emerging. The worst thing, I think, is to suppress or to pretend that it's not in there.
I agree. That, I think, is the worst part, is suppressing yourself and putting yourself in a mental cage or in a mental prison because you're afraid of, it's almost like that saying, the devil you know versus the devil you don't, right? We're more afraid of uncertainty than we are of, continuing on with the life that we're living, right? And whether it's we're falling into the sunk cost fallacy or whatever, we're scared to take that leap, and we're scared of the unknown. And that's what I'm wondering is, so you had this brewing inside of you and you knew that you wanted to do more, and it was very driven by a sense of mission and purpose. What was it like to pull the trigger on that? I was reading your essay that you have on Unmaze, and your son said to you, "Well, Daddy, what if this doesn't work out?" And I love your answer. So can you tell me that story and tell me what that feeling was like to actually take the leap, to launch? Here you are, you're in business, you're going solo, you're an entrepreneur, and your kid's asking you, "But what if this doesn't work?" What was that like?
Yeah. Look, I first, at the end, I don't think it's about choosing to do more. You said more. I want to, if you allow me, to make a slight adjustment. I don't think it's about more. It's about doing differently. And actually, in a way, is doing less. And the choice of doing less creates the space to then you can do more. But I felt over my entire life, maybe everyone does, I don't know, but I felt that was very hard. It was like always swimming against the current. You're always swimming against the current. It's like when you see like these modern pools where the professional swimmers, the pool is about this size, and the current just keeps going, and it's a lot of effort, but it's not moving from where the swimmer is, which is by purpose, I guess, certainly from a training standpoint. But I always felt like it's hard, and you keep going, you keep going, you keep going, and you never stop. And at least my family, for the values I inherited, which most of us did, is the never give up value. That's a great value until it's not, because you gotta need to learn also when to stop. That's a critical skill, like, and there are people that stay in relationships forever because they never give up. Well, hey, is this relationship helping you, or is this job like good for you? And maybe it's not. So anyway, I'm diverging a little, but going back to your question, to your the core of your question, when I chose to go on the Unmaze, that was a long process. And I'm not saying like I will never go back to the enterprise roles or corporate roles. I had a lot of fun. I was good at that. I had fun. I liked it. I built so many good relationships. But I'm just saying not now, because my body now is asking me to do this. And I feel that there's a mission, especially with AI, the stage of AI. How do we build that generative, positive cultures and operating models and relationships that drive the best of humanity, not replace humanity with a tool? So I think that there's a lot of work to do on that front. But when my son asked me, hey, Dad, what if Unmaze fails? Like, all he knows, he's 12 years old, all he knew was Thiago, the executive. And with these big fancy logos that, show up on television commercials and, oh, this is where my dad works. That's all he knew. And when they realized of the change, they're like, what if this fails? And my answer was, it is already a success. It is already a success just because it's live. We've made it happen. And it's not only me, it's my entire family. It takes a village. It's not only me doing this experiment, it's everyone. So it's everyone elevating themselves, and we all will learn new skills. We all will gain new perspective, and it's part of our journey, of our developmental journey. And what is the end? I have no idea.
Isn't that fun though? You have no idea. That's one thing that I'm learning to love and to embrace in this season of life, is not being afraid of uncertainty, but being wildly curious and okay with uncertainty, right? You have no idea what's going to happen with Unmaze. And to your point, as an entrepreneur, I think so much, sometimes I'll get caught in, the doom spiral of what if this goes wrong, or what if everything goes wrong, or what if this fails, right? But the more generative and positive question would be, well, what if everything goes right? And I'm curious about the mission. Your work with Unmaze is very mission driven. So what is the mission when you are going to a workplace? And to your point about positivity, let's start with the deeper mission. Then I want to ask you, what are we doing right? What's going right? And what do you think is going wrong that perhaps could use a different perspective?
Really good at questions and inquiry.
Thank you.
You're amazing.
I'm a very curious person.
This is all unscripted, so wow. Look, what I think it's going right. At the macro level, I think society at large is gaining awareness of the tipping point or the inflection that we are experiencing right now. It's messy, it's uncertain, it feels chaotic, it feels divisive. But honestly, I feel that awareness is gaining. And it's gaining to a point of a tipping point. What exactly will happen, I don't know. But I think that's going to be for better. So I'm positive. Because the awareness at the core of the awareness, in my opinion, is that people are realizing that problems are complex. There's no easy solves. The environmental crisis, the political crisis, the governance crisis that are happening globally, they are all multifaceted, complex, requires discipline and conversation across multiple actors and players and points of views and discrepancies. And I think we are all realizing that. So it's kind of like, it's almost forcing us, we gotta redesign. And that's the entire thesis of Unmaze. I think we have to redesign the how. So the why of creating better lives for ourselves, but for the future generations, for the environment, for society at large, it's at perils, it's at risk. And I think we have gained that. So that's positive. Question is, okay, Thiago, Poliana, what are you doing with it? Well, I think that is where the tipping point hits, because then we will see different types of actions happening. And I see the work that I do personally, professionally, is in contribution to that goal of raising awareness and helping address complex problems that there's no easy solution. So that's the positivity that I have. And I believe that art, ingenuity, science can all play a role together on that process. The second part of your question, remind me, what was it after what is working well?
Yeah, so what is a problem? What's a problem maybe with the system that you've identified that you are interested in solving? That's part of your mission at Unmaze.
Look, I think that the problem, look, I don't see as problems. I see as polarities. I see as competing priorities, or or tensions. We gotta solve certain tensions. We just talked about an earlier one. What is the balance between introspection and activity? I think that at the individual level, at team level, at society level, at organization and society level, I think we have to answer that question. And honestly, I don't think social media, for example, is doing any good. I see not only kids, but older adults, all hooked up on these devices that don't give a space for that introspection. It's systemically designed for that. And I worry. But anyway, I think that going back, this is completely a tangent that we can go there. But I see these tensions that are happening, the tension between short-term and long-term. Look, can we continue to extract, value or resources from Earth without allowing it to heal or reheal? To what extent and how, and how can we bring science rigor into that? So I think that there's these large tensions that regardless of which level of the system you are operating at, you have to be aware and say, okay, what do we do with it? And how over time, how do we accelerate to actually tackle those big, large problems? But, we use problems, but I don't think that they are problems. They are just tensions that we need to address.
Yeah, I like that framing of tensions. I'm curious about, what would you say to, so you're talking about redesigning the system. I don't want someone to misinterpret that as, we got to take a match to the system and just burn it down, right? I think when we say redesign the system, there might be this gut reflex, we can't redesign the system, right? You and I were just talking about healthcare and how can we possibly reimagine our American healthcare system. And I'm wondering, how do you actually get down to system design and changing a system from within, right? It's not something that's going to happen overnight. It's going to take a many teeny tiny incremental changes moving forward, right? But to your point, these aren't things that you're going to see overnight. You might not see the ROI, right? The short-term ROI. You might see it 10 or 15 years down the line. But investors, business people, they want to see the immediate return on investment. So, which is interesting tension too. So, what is your approach to actually redesigning and reimagining a system? We can go down the healthcare example. We can go wherever you want. But I'm curious about your actual approach, bringing everything that you've learned across your 25 years and now kind of being an outsider, an entrepreneur brought in as a consultant, right? How are you having that systems redesign conversation, and what's your approach?
I'm having every single day. Like at the organizational level, many organizations, they translate that into operating model redesign, like how we operate has to change. And that is happening at every single organization as we speak, or most of them. The core to your question, I think, Tatiana, relies on the how we redesign, how we go about. And I found the answer with my advisor, my professor, Richard Boyatzis, in the science of change. And in his theory and his and the method that he has been researching over 40 years, it's this idea that you gotta mobilize people around a common, positive, shared vision of the future that they all subscribe to, that they all design for. And what I feel is that most of the change and the transformations at all levels that we've discussed, that we are all experiencing, are mostly changes that are being imposed on us versus being co-created by us. That we can say, yes, I subscribe. That's the type of future that I aim for. I'm going to put discretionary effort, emotions, time, energy on make it happen. And to the healthcare example we were using, that is the bigger question that I have. If we just focus on the US, what is the type of health this society wants to create, the conditions this society wants to create for the future generations? What type of life are we going to enable the future? And unless we answer that fundamental question, we just have a patchwork of systems operating without an alignment for a future vision or a shared belief of what health could and should look like.
Yeah, I mean, just to give a tangible example to prove exactly what you're talking about, I read an article on LinkedIn this morning about how nurses who are consulted on which AI tools to adopt at a healthcare system actually have 19% higher adoption rates than in health systems who do not consult their nurses on the AI tools, right? So yeah, I mean, that proves exactly your point. Co-creation. And this vision that you're talking about, when you think about the future for your boys and the world that they're going to grow up in, what vision are you working towards for them? And we can use healthcare as an example. Healthcare in the US. What healthcare system would you hope exists for them and for future generations?
I will hold that to answer that question. But before, I want to just acknowledge one thing that you said. Look, the example you used on the nurses and the adoption rate being 17, 19, 20% higher because they felt their voices were heard. They felt their living experience was part of the decision of whatever tool your hospital uses. This is known, Tatiana, this phenomenon is known, scientifically speaking, for at least 80 years. I think it was in 1947 when Kurt Lewis actually identified that. He was a social psychologist. He's the founder of all the organizational psychology field. He identified that, like on the right of during World War II. So we have known that. The question is, have we taken the time? Have we taken the effort to bring the whole ecosystem to be part of that shared vision? And in this example, the nurses is a critical element. Is almost the unique point of failure, and they have not been consulted. So anyway, I think it's a great example. And my pushback is, let's use the science. Let's just use the science we already know. What is the vision for the future that Unmaze has? I want in every leader, team, system, at whatever complexity, whether an organization or larger system, Everyone that I touch or I'm invited to, I want to see them to flourish. I want to see them thriving. I want to see healthy relationships. I want to see traumas and insecurity and stupid competition moving away to what is the higher ground we are all want to operate on, and bring the best of that human system, all of the talents that are sitting there idle, like are dormant, just waiting for a spark for that to flourish. And I think that is the work. And you can't do that work without people's involvement. So, and technology now plays a huge role on enabling that to happen at scale. So how might we use technology at scale to bring all of that to life? That is what excites me.
Let's dwell on that for a moment, because I love what you're saying, this idea of human flourishing and unlocking each person's unique gifts and potential and talents in the workplace. I am curious about, so your experience in talent management, global talent management, how do you actually do that work within an individual and at scale? And what have you found, and even in your studies, right, the MLOC program, what is the biggest barrier to being able to unlock an individual's potential in the workplace? Gallup's 2025 World Workforce Report found that I think it was 80% of the global workforce is disengaged from their work. How do we fix that?
See, I think that's a very important stat. I haven't seen it. Doesn't surprise me at all. But that's a symptom. That's not the problem. That's a symptom. And the question then is, what is driving that disengagement? And I think that depending on the system, the answer is very complex. I have my own theories, my hypotheses here. But I think at the most fundamental level is a matter of purpose. It's a matter of alignment. It's a matter of coherency. It's a matter of, hey, are we inviting these people to shape, frame, design the type of experiences and the type of outputs or outcomes that they are there to deliver? And I guess my answer is most likely not. I'm going to continue using the example from your world. You are a nurse. You go to a place, you have your SOPs, you can't deviate from the SOPs, of course, because there's lives at hand. When you see an opportunity to do something different, and when you see a problem, are they listening to you? Do you have autonomy? Do you have some freedom to try to change for better? Like to what extent? So I just think that we gotta go into the reality, into the real experience of people and understand what that is like. And then from that, like I am sure people that are close to the work, they are the ones that know the best. Pretending that from a boardroom you can actually solve all of these problems, that is theoretical. So there's a lot of tensions here to be addressed, but I feel that fundamentally the Gallup comment, it's a symptom, and I think we can address that actually redesigning that entire system, because like it doesn't make any sense. Imagine, back in the day, you had a car with 5 horses and only one horse is pulling the car while the 4 are just, there. Like that's basically it. Like, if you're on the far west, old west days back in the 1800s, like what would you do?
I want to dwell on alignment. This was a word too I had pulled out from your essay. And in terms of alignment, I am reading Range by David Epstein. Have you read this book? I think you would love it. Oh, Thiago, you would love it. It's such a great book. He talks about this term match quality. right? And how employees at a workplace, if you have a higher level of match quality between who you are as a person, you know, your interests, your values, your aptitudes, you are much more likely to be successful in the workplace, right? I think of how many people might not be in the right role or might not have a sense of purpose in their role. And how can we, like you said, reimagine the system or engage talent a little bit differently, so maybe that we're getting a higher match quality, and so people are more engaged with their work and more aligned, you know, in terms of, you know, getting into a flow state, right? I had given you that example of, you know, at the firm, I was up until, you know, 2 a.m. working on a deal, right? Whereas now when I'm researching, you know, neuroscience and brain health and public policy, and I don't even realize it's 2 a.m., right? You find
Yeah.
yourself in
Yeah.
this, yes, in
Yeah.
this flow, and it's beautiful. I wonder if, okay, do systems, do workplaces, do executives, do they see this as like a pipe dream? Do they see this as something that's squishy and not delivering ROI? How can we instill greater purpose and on an individual level, maybe greater match quality in the workplace? With your experience in talent management, have you heard the term like just match quality and how you think about a person's unique talents, gifts, interests, aptitudes, and how to match them with the right role?
100%. That's one of the kind of foundational elements of talent management on, making sure that you match what the role is against what the requirements are and what the person can offer. So that is basically the fundamental of every single recruitment process. So that's the tactical part. And then you have succession planning that's doing the same, but against a future profile or future needs, and so on and so forth. So you're always matching role against person. The person is, in itself a complex unit. It has traits, it has skills, it has values, it has experiences, it has competencies. But anyway, a mix of all of this can always match and infer whether a person can perform and how likely that person will perform against whatever set of tasks or requirements are for any given job. But I think the matching, it can mean multiple things. You can match people versus jobs. You can match also people versus relationships. You can match people versus culture. So depending on your personality and my personality, and the context where we are operating, there will be tensions or synergies on how actually our personality traits they match. So there's a matching right there. Right?
Mm-hmm.
By the way, a lot of the coaching online or digital AI enabled tools these days, they do exactly that. They look at your traits, my traits. Some look at the context around us and start to infer, hey, if Thiago and Tatiana are going to have a conversation because of something they disagree, how best to communicate, for example. So that match can easily happen now with AI-enabled tools. But for me, I think the biggest match, I don't know if it's in this book, I have not read, is the match of purpose and intentions.
Mm-hmm.
And that for me is the one that's kind of the backbone of everything. Because I know people that that don't really fully love the tasks they have, but they fully love and they understand why the tasks they do matter for that purpose, and that
Mm-hmm.
connects with their individual purpose. And the reverse also is very interesting. Like you can you can love the work you do, but you are in an environment where you don't align from a purpose standpoint. So that's not for you, because you'll be unhappy. So there's I think matching means so many things, but for me, the most critical one is the matching of values and the match of purpose.
Hmm. Let's go back to AI. I want to go back to AI and get your perspective on the positives that can come out of AI and how AI can help humanity? You know, we were touching on human flourishing. How can AI enable human flourishing? And what do we need to safeguard against when it comes to AI? I've read some articles about cognitive surrender, losing our sense of agency and self and critical thinking ability and creativity and communication skills to over-reliance on AI, right? So we're already using AI in a way that is hindering our growth, our collective growth as a species. So how could we be deploying and using AI in a way that is enabling human flourishing, not eroding that?
Look, I have a positive view and experience with AI, and I am cautiously optimistic. At the macro level, I feel that society still need to figure out exactly the type of role we want AI to play on running the globe, running the world. I think that there is a macro governance discussion that haven't taken place yet. And I'm not implying, oh, these should be like the global atomic treaties and stuff on how we govern that, but probably something along those lines. You know, I think we do need some sort of treaty or clarity. So whatever power yields from the opportunities and possibilities that the AI era will offer us and is offering us, it's somehow managed for the betterment of society or legislated on to the betterment of society. So I think that is a risk for me. In terms of if we bring back more into the mundane day-to-day stuff, I agree with you that for many people it can be a detriment on many of the skills that you described. And I think it has to be used with judgment and care. But I'm really excited on the possibilities that it offers if it's seen as an augment to our intelligence. I don't think it's replacing our intelligence. I think it's an augmentation, a gig, and how we bring the two intelligence together is what probably will determine success, but I don't think it's a replacement. I think it's an addition to our intelligence, if
Absolutely.
managed correctly. The thing with AI that I'm noticing on many organizations is that many organizations have dealt with the cybersecurity risk at the top. Yes, that's super important. Some have already built a policy or philosophies around the use of AI in this spirit of augmentation and the responsible use of AI. So I think that some companies have gone there already. Some companies have given access to the tools for the individuals, and now they're pulling back because they realize it's too expensive and it has not translated into real outcomes. I think that where I believe we can unmaze is the middle mass. Because at the middle is where work happens across people, across teams, across departments, across functions, across geographies. And for the full power of AI to happen, you have to redesign that flow. Because if each one of the links on that chain they optimize within, it just becomes a bubble tower. So you gotta redesign the full flow to unleash the human intelligence and the machine intelligence to optimize and to create space for new things that organization can do. That's the other piece that I feel that companies have the opportunity to focus on. It's what will this technology give us a space to start doing we are not doing today. That's the exciting part.
So are they finding that the work of having to redesign the workflow with AI integrated into it, is that too costly? Is that too expensive? It takes too much time, or there's some kind of pressure to just roll out these AI tools and hopefully start seeing some ROI? If that's a challenge and that we're just now realizing it 3 years later that, we've just been bolting AI onto our company and not redesigning how we operate. I'm just wondering, okay, so organizations are waking up to this fact. They were scratching their heads. They were confused. Why are we not seeing the ROI on deploying these AI tools? And you said they're kind of rolling back, right? So I'm curious, are they pursuing the redesign of workflows, or are they just pulling back on the technology? We're not going to use it then.
I think it's all over the place. You have all sorts of use cases. I think there are companies that have made the choice to redesign the work, and they are seeing the benefits of it, including savings, but also operational efficiencies, capacity, all of that. So I think that there are really great examples. There are also really great examples of just raising the skill set and raising the capabilities that people have in terms of using that, and all of the learning efforts, and all of that is important because people need to understand what the possibility that these tools give to them instead of just trying a trial and error. So I think that there are good things happening. Where I see, to your question, it's all of the above. Yes, it's costly. Yes, it takes time, and again, to the example of the nurses, you got to bring the nurse in to redesign the process that she's part of. So there's no magic pill or just throwing a new process out there and expect people will adhere to it. They will not, most likely they will not. So you've got to bring them along in the journey and build the skills so they can actually continue to redesign on their own, which I think is the sustainable part of all of that. With the AI agents, with all these tools in the loop. So that is my view on what is working versus not, but it's a journey, and the cost, they're pulling back because they are seeing that there's no real ROI. And the tokenization piece is really hard. People are getting the machines to do some of their stuff. And the latest I saw, for front workers that are using AI, it can be a capacity release of 8 hours a week. It's like a day a week. So how are companies using that free up day? Is that generating productivity and improvements in innovation or relationships and all of that? No, it's ending up with the 80% disengaged. So there's a disconnect here that needs to be, integrated in a way.
Yeah, that's interesting. Touching back on the disengagement part, I read an article the other day about how using AI, it's actually creating more work for people. People aren't using that free time to do things that they could be doing with their free time. They're filling that time with more work, and other ways of using AI are creating more things with AI and almost finding themselves in this state of, I had read an article in Psychology Today about, they call it, oh my gosh, what was the completion debt? And you're chatting with ChatGPT or Claude at the end of every chat that you have, or every thread, every project, it's always suggesting something for you to do next. You can never just complete a thought or a project. It's always wanting you to keep going, and maybe they're designed that way, right? And I thought that was interesting, is that so far the research shows we're not actually doing anything else with that free time, but filling it with more work. But that work is not necessarily productive or engaged. And perhaps that's part of the reason why, we're not seeing ROI on AI investment yet. I think part of it too might also be mistrust. I know I read this article from McKinsey the other day about how over 40% of nurses, still mistrust. They don't trust AI. And when I went through ProSci's change management certification program, the concentration was AI adoption. And they had some research that showed that 30% of employees were actually actively sabotaging their company's AI strategy because they don't trust it, or they think it's going to take their job. And that's a problem.
That is. I mean, The only thing I can think of, Tatiana, is, look, again, you got to bring people along.
Mm-hmm.
And my advice to my clients and to the engagements that I've been on this space, because AI is part, AI is part of the work that I do, but like most of the work that I do is really organizational development and, scaling and all of that stuff. But like on the AI side, I always tell them, don't start with the tool. It's never a good strategy. Start with the value. Start. What is your business? How do you differentiate your business? How you can grow your business? How you can make a bigger, better impact on the customers you serve? How can you innovate differently? So design what is that value creation agenda that matters to you, and then ask the question, how can I use the existing technologies to accelerate that, to enable that? That's a very different conversation than what we are having.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That is generative. That is possibility. And don't try to do AI in everything. Not all work streams or processes or the stuff that a company does is created equal. There are always 2, 3 things that matter the most from the customer angle. Focus on those. Get those right. Then you can go to maybe something else. But like don't start with honestly the back end processes. Like I would not. I would start with where you can actually make the biggest impact. And that's kind of what we are working with a few clients on that. The other comment I would like to make is when you look at technology adoption, there's a lot of research across the last 100 years on any technology adoption. It follows a pattern, follows a curve. And at the beginning, there's always a cost of transition, which includes the cost of learning.
Mm-hmm.
So also like we have to look through the lens of a technology adoption curve, and it takes time. It's not a simple switch in, switch off. And I feel that is also not being accounted for when all of the statistics are put in place. Like that has not been different than in this sense of many other technology revolutions or evolutions in terms of adoption rates.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In terms of learning and training, I find that most of the training is on the tool itself, right? Example, we're rolling out an ambient scribe. This is how you actually use the platform. 1 hour LMS module. Okay, great. Here you are. We're not really focusing enough, I think, on skills like critical thinking, like metacognition, right? AI is mirroring back to you what you're putting in. So if you're not able to question your own assumptions or biases, or if you're not framing a question the right way or thinking critically, it's only going to mirror back to you what you're putting in. So how are we teaching these skills that are, per the research, getting eroded so quickly? Critical thinking capacity. We are essentially cognitively offloading our system 2 thinking processes to AI. And it makes me wonder, to what extent I think we should be investing so much more in actually building those human capabilities and training those human capabilities, not just training people on the AI tool, right? Like a 1 hour module. Here's how you use this AI tool. I'm curious from your perspective on what skills and what would you want to train talent on if as you're rolling out an AI tool, right? Say you're rolling out an AI tool in your organization, in a workflow. What human skills do you think matter aside from just being proficient in using that AI tool?
Tatiana, I love our conversation. I probably will take like an hour on this topic alone.
Oh.
2 dimensions to your question. I think number one, I will be provocative now. I challenge the causal fact that AI is gonna negatively impact our cognitive abilities in terms of of critical reasoning and thinking and pattern recognitions and all of that stuff. It's just going to accelerate. This problem was already here in our society
I agree.
before OpenAI launched ChatGPT 3 years ago.
Absolutely. Great point.
I just think that it's just accelerating, it's making it worse, but the problem was already here. So again, a symptom, and my hypothesis or my thesis on the what is behind it is that we as society for decades, perhaps centuries, no decades, have started to diminish the role of education. And education has become more of a tooling exercise than actually preparing the unit, the person, the student, to think on their own. Like I look back to your drawing there, this is what these guys were doing back then.
Absolutely.
They were teaching to think.
To think.
They were not teaching to know. Right? And I think that model of the ancient Greek is actually what we need more. Which again, there's no AI that can replace, in my humble opinion. So to the second part of your question then, what is needed? I think that what is needed is to teach people the ability to ask questions, to inquire, to inquiry about what is going on, to stay curious. And instead of jumping into conclusions or easy answers, to truly understand the object, to understand the problem. That's, I think, is the skill number one.
Yeah. Ask more questions, ask better questions. But one of my past podcast guests said this line that just really stuck in my mind. The quality of your life is determined by the quality of your questions.
100%.
Yeah. And if we've taught, I look back, I've been thinking about this lately because there's actually a whole chapter on what you're talking about in this range by David Epstein. He talks about in our K through 12 education system and even in higher ed, your undergraduate studies, we teach memorization and regurgitation, right? Through our standardized testing, memorize, consume, and spit it back out to us, right? We don't teach digestion and integration and, like you said, asking these generative questions, better questions, critical inquiry. And even in undergraduate studies, and perhaps this is why our society, our systems, organizations are so siloed, especially in healthcare, right? We know in healthcare, but we teach specialization rather than generalization and general skills like critical thinking, lateral thinking, alien thinking, just different ways to think and to problem solve. And I think we'd be much better off if we were teaching those skills. And I didn't realize it. I didn't until I was looking back. I look at my law school education, comparing it to, like my nursing education and compared to being in practice and compared to my K through 12 education. And I don't think I truly learned in the ICU, like you have to be a critical thinker, right? But I don't think I truly learned how to deeply critically think and think from different perspectives and question my own assumptions until I was trained in law school. Law school teaches you, they say, how to think, not how to practice law. They're questioning you via the Socratic method, right, in every class. And that is the type of training I wish that we had in our K through 12 system. And I don't know. I don't know what it is. I don't know if we think that kids aren't capable of that. We think we just have to teach them, history, science, math, just be able to spit it back out to us. But I think kids, and I think of this now, like since becoming a mom, they're so much more capable than I think we give them credit for.
100%. 100%. Like 100%. And again, like goes back to like some of my earlier comments. I think we are gaining that awareness to get to a tipping point that some of this stuff has to be redesigned because they have served us. We built an amazing labyrinth, very successful. We solved the problem, but by solving the problem of locking in the Minotaur, we create new problems of a higher complexity. And that is the journey of us individually, us society, is as we grow, as we develop, we become readier to deal with more complexity. And I think that that's the tipping point we are. So look, again, like as Unmaze, I don't know where we're going to go. I'm excited. I'm going to be doing my little grain on that journey. And I hope to meet up along the way amazing people like you, Tatiana. We met at the
so
Case
happy
Western.
we met.
Yeah, completely random. And here we are, and that's the beauty. That's the beauty of the world.
That is the beauty. I'm so happy that we crossed paths when we did, truly. I want to, if I may, Thiago, I want to take us back to Brazil for a moment and working with your dad in the factory and what that experience was like. You painted a really cool picture in your essay, on your website. And it was so beautiful. I really appreciated your reflection there. So can you take us back there and what you learned early on as a child about work, about growing up in a society with so much civil unrest? I'm really curious about your perspective looking back on that time in your life.
Very grateful for my childhood, and grateful for my parents and all those around me that created such a safe space. When I reflect, look, I'm very different than my father, very different personality. But these guys are very interesting character. He was forced to be a doctor. That's what success was for any family, was to have a doctor in the family. So he goes there. The moment he gets the diploma, the title, he finishes school, he gives it to his parents and says, now I'm going to do what I want. And he's an inventor, amazing. Another Daedalus, amazing creator of things. And he built his own company back then. And everyone, why? Why? You could just be a doctor and live a good life. Same as in the US, doctors have all good lives in Brazil, like probably everywhere, mostly. And, from a financial standpoint, it's like, no, what I want is this. So and he's been always very messy, very fluid, and over time, I've gained more and more appreciation for that, which is kind of the opposite what I've been my 20 plus years, right? In terms of like needing security, needing, stability, and that was great. Like the Johnson and Johnsons of the world, they gave me that. Like I don't complain. But I think it's a great, great example that I had in-house, and it was messy, and there were parts that were not great examples, as always, and you take what you learn from it on the good and bad and grow with it. And the environment in Brazil, for everyone that is from my generation that grew up in the 80s in Brazil, it is an experience. And I know that there are other countries that went through the same. A lot of folks from, Eastern Europe also back then had very different lives and all of that. But it was much simpler, uh, much less things. Like consumerism was not what it is right now. So you learn to appreciate what you have. You learn to appreciate and enjoy with the little that you have. You just figure it out, and I think I carry that until now, and I hope I'm extending that to my kids. But also just the ability to navigate messiness. Like I remember, inflation was at times 80% per month, 80% per month.
Wow.
So when the paycheck would arrive, and they usually would arrive at the same day for most people, you had to choose to go to the supermarket that day, because the following day you would go, probably your currency would have already devaluated 10%, whatever. So I remember going to supermarkets and literally staying in the line to pay for 3 hours.
Wow. Oh my
That
goodness.
gives you perspective on life,
Oh yeah.
you know.
Wow.
And I was what, maybe 6 years, 7 years old, and I vividly still remember that. So I think that those things shapes and gives you appreciation for many things we take for granted.
Wow, you gained such perspective at such a young age. The line that I really liked from your essay that I think sums that up, you said uncertainty was not an exception.
That's
Uncertainty
exactly
was the condition.
Yeah, uncertainty was the day by day. That was the daily routine was uncertainty. And yet, like, it didn't feel uncertain to a kid. Like, I was surrounded. It was perfect. Like,
So to you, it felt normal.
I can't complain. And it was good. It was, it was good. Like, we were super blessed. Always.
So talking about uncertainty and talking about change, most people don't like change. Change is hard. Change requires effort. Change requires examining yourself and your beliefs about the world and being open-minded and willing to change your mind. Can you think of a time in your life where you changed your mind about something, or where you learned something about yourself or about the world that made you question something that you believed before?
Yes. So, two things. One is, I don't think people hate change.
Okay.
I challenge you on that. I think people hate change that is put on them without their active participation or input.
Okay.
That is my thesis. Let's put that way. In terms of, have I changed my mind all the time? All the time. All the time. Like, and for example, one that I've been thinking a lot is that I've always thought that success was about delivering, hitting milestones and goals and getting stuff done and progressing and being competitive and all that. That was great. That was Thiago for 20 years, brought me a lot of cool stuff and experiences. Perhaps as I age, perhaps as I go into this next chapter, what I realize is that is a yes, but it's an end. It has to be yes, and the relationships matter. And building sustainable relationships around you matter as much as the accomplishments. And I think that many people tend to forget that. Not that I was a jerk. I was never a jerk, or, those people that just think on accomplishing things. But the more that I age, the more I realize balance, finding the right balance is success.
In building relationships, what do you think is the most important thing to building a successful relationship with another human being?
There's so many. But I think it's humanity. It's, just empathy. Seeing the other person, being authentic yourself, and creating psychological safety that dialogue, that communication, that relationship can exist. Even in face of conflicts or different points of views, and just having that, I think that's it. Like, humanity, and seeing people who they are and who they want to be, and applauding and valuing them by who they are, I think that this is kind of how I tend to take my relationships. And I'm a very private person. Like, in my personal life, like, I have a lot of friends, but like, I think as everyone else, deep human connection, it's built over time also, and yeah, I mean, I could go on, but I think that that's kind of humanity what defines everything.
Yeah, I'm thinking about this generation that's being brought up with social media and tools like AI, and there's research to support that they are turning to these tools for connection, right? So they're not connecting with a human being, they're connecting with an AI, right? An LLM, a bot. And when they're on social media, despite the original intent of social media, we're here in this crisis of isolation and this loneliness epidemic, especially among the younger generations. And I find that when we're on social media, we're not really connecting, we're not really talking with each other, we're maybe talking to each other or yelling at each other. And I just wonder how we can foster and cultivate this human connection in the next generation that's being brought up with technology and native to the concept of connecting with technology and not connecting with other human beings.
Look, again, provocative. This is a phenomenon that was happening before AI. This was a phenomenon that was happening before social media. The average American kid was watching television on average per day. I think it was between 4 to 6 hours average. So there are most likely some that were already sitting in front of the TV as a zombie, because my kids stay as a zombie watching TV or these whatever for 8 hours or more. So that isolation was already here before.
I see what you're saying.
I just think that these new waves of technology has just made it worse.
Okay, so it's exacerbating an existing symptom that was already there. Okay,
I think that was already there. And luckily, I think, again, we reached a tipping point. So Australia passed a law, kids younger than 16 can't access whatever, social media. Now France is doing the same. And the lobby will try to protect, but there's only one way forward, which is development. And those restrictions will counterweight the negativity of what social media is doing on kids and on adults as well. I see some of my family adult members, they are hooked up on the thing worse than kids. So I agree with you that is there, and I just think that needs to change, because indeed it is just like there's no activity on the brain. You're just like consuming, and especially those that you just scroll up and down. It's already proven that it's damaging. It's damaging the neurons. So I don't have all the scientific claims, but I mean, for me it's very obvious. But yeah, did I answer your question?
Yeah, you did. So if you could think of something that society needs right now, American society, let's limit it, let's not talk about the globe. What would you give to American society July 2026? What idea, what little nugget, what little gift, if you could give that to American society circa July 2026, what would it be?
Oof. I think we are all part of the whole. I don't see this divisiveness. Why we created that? Those barriers. We are all the same, like I think what most people want is the same. And I would rather see us focusing on what is common versus what is uncommon. And it's great that we have places we diverge. Because then the question is, okay, on these divergent topics, that diversity is positive, it can make us better. How we work through those differences, how we work through, the conflicts is what matters. But I think we just spend too much time on pointing fingers and creating false enemies. you know, just as a divergent. And I dispute that. No, most people are good. Most people want the same thing. Let's work out the differences. And maybe if we don't have a solve for a difference, let it stay. Let it stay, you know, and you know, things will work out, you know. Let's take the steps where we can make the steps now.
I appreciate that perspective, rallying around what we share and our shared experience and not what makes us different. And I think the how, you know, we talked about the how throughout this episode. I think the how of how we can articulate our point of view and have a different point of view and have a dialogue where opinions and perspectives differ. I don't know that we know how to have conversations like that. I read about this in Crucial Conversations, which is a super great book. And then there's that book by Jackie, I believe it's Jackie Stavros and Michelle Torres, Conversations Worth Having, right? She put on a workshop at that leadership conference that we were at. And that's where, you know, this idea of appreciative inquiry comes in and generative questions, right? Not depreciative language and depreciative questions, but generative questions. And I think that that could be an answer to having more rich dialogue where we're not just polarized, talking at each other, yelling at each other, but willing to engage with differing perspectives without necessarily feeling attacked, right? Like you said, let it be, let it stay. If someone has a differing perspective, that's okay. Like you can respect that without having to urge your perspective onto them or without having to convince them, you know?
100%. You gotta go to the Master of Leadership and Organization.
I'm sure I would love it.
I will continue to insist. That's all in there, but in a deeper meaning and way.
Okay.
I think you would love it because exactly what you said is the core of what that program is about.
Oh, cool. Okay. I really do. I think I would love it. I'm still hung up on back and forth. I am really fascinated by, you know, everything that you're studying in the MLOC program. I know I would enjoy it, but I have this competing interest in the neuroscience, right? The hard neuroscience behind the way that we are wired and in getting down to first principles in our brains and why they operate the way that they do, but then how that translates into our behavior and our interactions with other human beings. So it's just tough. I have those, you know, really two competing strong interests, and who knows, maybe I'll end up with both masters one day because I love to learn. But yeah.
Let it emerge.
Yeah.
It will emerge at the right time.
Thiago, I want to ask you, so earlier on in your introduction, you had mentioned you've traveled, you've gotten the opportunity, you know, and privilege to travel all over the world, experience different cultures, different cuisines. What was your favorite country that you visited? And what was your favorite cuisine? And were they the same?
It's going to be a cliche answer.
Okay.
I mean, there's so many other countries I want to visit, so I wish I had known all of them. But from the ones I visited, I always feel very home it's southern Italy. There's something in there in Sicilia, for example, that I feel that I probably lived there in prior lives. I don't know, you know, there's just something in there, and it's messy and it's chaotic and it's beautiful and it's kind of, it encapsulates it all. And I love that. And the food is it's like amazing. There's nothing more simpler than better. Well, and the gelatos are just amazing. So yeah.
So is that where you got hooked on gelato?
No.
Okay, I have to know, digress with me real quick. How did your fascination in gelato come about?
Well, it was an exercise of deep reflection on finding what was the core of Thiago. And I was just thinking through all of my changes, and I realized that really these two forces of science and art, they had always been there inside me. And I was like, what is the one thing that actually integrates both beautifully that I love? Then gelato came up. That was how it started.
You started making gelato.
Then I got myself a machine and I started making it.
Wow. Oh, so cool. Okay. Favorite flavor?
Oh, for me, well, that's a big dispute here in my house. Okay. Mine is pistachio.
Mm-hmm.
I love pistachio. I love also dulce de leche.
Ooh, yeah. That's a good one.
Yes, yes. And I love also just a plain good old vanilla, well done. Oh my God, it's just so good. I love also orange, mandarin, kind of fruity, just type of flavors. I love so many. But anyway, these are kind of my favorites.
Thank you for digressing on that point. I was very curious about that. So, Thiago,
what's yours?
Yeah, what's mine? That's a good, I mean, I would say pistachio. I love pistachio. And I think you're right. I think a really good quality vanilla bean, some like Madagascar vanilla caviar. Yeah, I think a good quality vanilla bean. Those would probably be my top two.
Yeah.
Thank you for asking. The host getting asked questions. I love that. Thank you for punting back.
I can't hold myself on asking questions. But I've been like an hour plus holding here.
Okay, I'm gonna wrap and we can talk more after. Thiago, I close every episode, every conversation, by asking if you could think of someone that you have crossed paths with in your life that has changed you in a way, impacted you. It could be a conversation you had with a stranger. It could be a loved one. And you don't have to say their name. You can just think of them, but you are welcome to say their name if you'd like to. And think of that person. And if you could finish the line from Wicked, the musical, is because I knew you, I have been changed for good. So if you can think of someone who's impacted you in that way and think of them and finish the line, because I knew you.
I've been changed for good by you because you taught me to moderate, to balance, to enjoy life, to not be hung up on stupid little details along the journey, and most importantly, to be generous to others. And giving to others is giving to yourself. And I'm very grateful for what you taught me, and I've learned a lesson. And I've been trying to apply that in my own life. Thank you. And that's for my grandma.
Oh, that's beautiful. I'm so grateful for this conversation and for you creating time and space for this conversation. So thank you, Thiago. Until next time.
Thank you, Tatiana. It was a pleasure being here, and I had a lot of fun. Thank you so much.